pleasure of introducing to you Father Ken Major. He's a relative of Mac, the infamous Mac Mortimer. Reverend Major lived on Key Biscayne from approximately 1943 till about 1949. Father, how did you get to Key Biscayne?
Well, we came by boat. Obviously, in those days, there was no bridge connecting the island to the mainland.
Right.
And of course, my parents worked here with Mac, and after my dad died, my mother, the family moved on to the mainland. But we would come with Mac and Gussie on weekends. The boat would come, leave the Keys on Saturday, stay over until Monday, and we'd come back over to the island.
Right. And Mac was worked on the plantation on the Key. He was what, the caretaker at that time?
Yes, he started as a common laborer, and he worked himself up and became the overseer.
And he started on the plantation about what year, do you remember?
I think somewhere around 1917, 16, somewhere in there.
Oh my! So,
he came out as a real young fella at the age of about 17.
And it was a working coconut plantation at that time?
Yes, it was. During the days that I was here. Prior to that time, it had been thought of as a development, a resort for people who wanted to buy properties and develop the property here on Key Biscayne. After the 26th storm, the people stopped coming, and then of course with the stock market crash in 1929, people weren't able to buy property. They didn't have the wherewithal to do it. And after that, they really took off with the developing the coconut groves. And Mac was responsible for hiring the people that worked the plantation, and he would bring his relatives in from the Bahamas, and that's how we all got connected and are all related.
I see, and your family came from the Bahamas too,
Yeah,
I assume.
exactly. We came from the very same home that both Mac and David in Long Island. Mac was from a place called Clarencetown, the capital of Long Island, and David was from a place called Roses in Long Island. They were both born the same year, by the way, 1898. And know that we didn't have any electricity. We had battery-operated radios, so we had to cut it off at a certain time. But we always looked forward to that in the evening. Yeah.
Did you have, now there's no electricity, did you have a generator or do you have kerosene lamps?
We had kerosene lamps in the house, but which we depend upon mostly for light. But there was a generator to light the few lights along the dirt roads that were here operated out of the barn, a generator. And Mac would cut the generator on in the early part of the evening, and then to cut it off in the early morning.
Okay, and the generator was basically for the lighting, and cooking was what, a cook stove that you had?
We had a kerosene oil. We used kerosene oil burners to do our cooking. There were no electrical stoves or anything like that. Or that we would sometimes barbecue, and that was a big event. Or when we had our staple would be fish and conch and all the seafoods, the delicacies that we like so well. Yeah.
And did you go fishing? And I guess you go for what, crayfish or lobster?
Yes, we did. They had a very interesting way of scoping out the crayfish, or the crawfish we used to call them. They had a bucket with a glass bottom, and they used a very long pole with a prong on it. And of course, they would look through the glass bucket and spot the crayfish, and they would try to stab them. And if they didn't stab them, they would dive down and bring them up.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And I bet it was teeming with crayfish those days too.
It was. It really, of course, we didn't know anything about a lobster season or anything like that. It seems like they were always around. And there were crabs and conchs that we would go out early to the beach and get the conch would wash up with the water. As the tide came in, we would pull them off the wall or the rocks that were out there.
Oh, those beautiful conch shells? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Did you ever make soup out of the conch shells?
We had several dishes we made out of conch. We had conch salad. We had stewed conch. We had cracked conch, which is, of course, fried with a batter and so forth. And during the winter months, during the fall rather, just before fall, we would catch a lot of conch and fish, and we would salt it down and hang it out, dry it out for the winter months. And then when the winter came around, we would throw it in the hot water and draw off the salt and then prepare it that way.
Wonderful. How did you get your other provisions that you'd need? Like you mentioned like flour and
Yes.
things like that for
The
frying
dry
the oil.
goods, yes.
The dry goods, right.
Yeah, the boat, as I said at the very beginning, would go over to this mainland so that we may do our shopping. There were no stores here whatsoever.
There was not one store.
Not one store.
And no gas stations.
That's exactly right. No cars.
Oh, no cars.
We traveled by foot everywhere we were practically, and we would go to the stores. We would pick up all our flour, our rice, the dry goods, and they would store them on the boat. And when we come back, and of course they didn't buy just a lot. They would buy a whole sack full of
Right.
rice, grits, or whatever that
In the
dry goods-
50-pound sacks,
yes,
I
right,
imagine.
Exactly.
And the mainland was Miami.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And of course, when there was very little clothing, we weren't concerned about styling in those days. We didn't know what a designer was, what designer clothes was at the time. We were just happy to have on the bare necessities
Right.
and to enjoy the good Florida Biscayne weather and the sunshine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a sea turtle on the beach?
Yes, we did. As a matter of fact, sea turtle was one of the staple. On occasion, we would go out to the beach, and Gussie, Mac's wife,
Right.
would notice the tracks of the turtle
Oh, she'd see 'em
and
in there
follow
every
the
morning.
tracks
Right.
where the turtle had laid their eggs.
Uh-huh.
And they'd come back to Mac, and the fellows around would come back with lanterns that the next evening, follow the turtle after the turtle came out of the sea, turn the turtle over on its back, and then do what they had to do. And they would take the meat and they would corn it down, and that's a part of our staple.
That was part of your diet
Yes,
those
right,
days. I can imagine
exactly.
you kind of ate
Yeah.
off the land, so to
That's
speak.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And of course, what I loved about it, you felt free, and it's an amazing thing to feel free, to know that there are no laws governing you. That you say you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other.
Other than
And
what the
you-
family imposed.
That's exactly right. That's exactly. And then you began to get a sense of what was expected of you. Now, I don't want to lead you to believe that we had no responsibilities, because we certainly had. I had to wash the dishes
Right.
to earn my keeps
Sure.
and do some other things like that. Yeah.
And then you told me there were only about 5 families on the island
Exactly,
that time?
exactly. But we were all related. Mac, David, my parents when they were here. There was a Harry Major at one time here. There was a Chris Ramings here. We were all related, and they were all from Long Island, almost from the same settlements in Long Island in the Bahamas.
Right, Long Island, Bahamas,
Yes,
not
yes,
New York.
yeah,
And but of the Macca family, was there anyone of the Macca family or Matheson family at that time?
Yes, yes. The boys were here, and I think there was a sister. They were listed a little older than myself, and I remember they were very tall, lanky.
Yes.
They would come by every so often. I believe the overseer at the time was a man by the name of Mr. Shelton, and he would come by to give Mac directions and orders as to what needed to be done, and Mac would see that the gang was brought together and they
I
would
see.
follow through.
And this was the family of the
Mathesons.
Matheson family.
the Matheson
And I
family.
believe they had a home here at that time?
Yes, they did. Along the dirt road, not too far away from the storm shelter house where the families would go when there was a storm coming in the direction of the
Right.
key.
And this is where the Mathesons had their home.
Well, that's where they had their home at that time.
Okay. You mentioned the storm shelter. Tell me a little bit about the storm shelter.
It was a rather interesting place. It was made of solid concrete. Part of it was embedded in the ground, and had an upstairs and a downstairs. The families of color lived downstairs when we had to go in, and the white families lived upstairs. I remember one particular time when I think somewhere around between 45 or 47, a storm came in the direction of the Keys, and it was just too late for us to catch the boat to get to the mainland.
Right.
And so we were forced to go into the shelter at that time. And I remember that the water rising and covering the land, and some of it began to seep into the part of the building that we were. And of course, then we finally got the all clear that the water was receding. We could return to our homes. And I remember very vividly how Mac took me on his shoulder, because I was just such a little kid, little
Right.
thin kid. And we got to his home, and we began to make sure everything was in place. And as we did so, there was a snake caught between
Oh, my.
the battens and, of course, the screens. And I became very frightened. Mac took a piece of newspaper, put a match to it, lit it, put it on against the wall. The snake fell out in the water.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
gosh. Now, a storm, did you have any anticipation that a storm was coming? Did you know? Or it would just
It
come
came
upon you?
rather suddenly. We didn't have the technology that we have now to know well in advance when a storm might be headed
Right,
in the direction of our area. Those kinds of things that we are so aware of now. We
right.
were not, and we were kind of, in some sense, kind of indifferent about it. We'd gone through so many storms. And being a kid, it didn't faze me.
No, it's just
Well,
another
yeah,
rainstorm.
that's right, exactly.
But there
Exactly.
was nothing on the radio. You said you listened to the radio. There was nothing on the radio
No,
saying there's a storm out in the
no, no.
Caribbean.
We at the main house where Mr. Shelton and the Mathesons lived,
Mm-hmm.
they got the news first and would sort of communicate it to the rest of us. And Mac would communicate it to everyone, and we would all get in the truck and go down to the storm shelter.
So the shelter, and it was a shelter. Was it? Did you have provisions in it at all? Or
Oh no,
was
you had to take your own provisions. There were some little cots and tables and
right?
chairs there, but the rest of anything food items and so
Uh-huh.
forth. And we didn't anticipate being there for a very long period of time.
So you
I
probably
think we
didn't need too much water. I guess was the main thing.
Exactly, exactly. And water, let me share with you that water was not something didn't have the faucets that we have now.
That's
We
right.
caught our water by the rainwater. We used the rainwater for cooking, for bathing, and for drinking. And we caught that was rainwater that would held in a cistern.
And a cistern. A lot of people aren't
Yeah,
familiar with
yeah,
cisterns.
yeah,
Can you
yeah.
explain what a cistern
Well,
is?
it's a storage, an area built as a little with walls around it.
Yes.
In this case, it was round, and the water would drain off the building as it rained, and would catch it in there. We had a little spigot where we turned it on and off.
And this would drain off the roof of the building.
That's
I
right, the
assume,
dormitory.
and it would go into this
The
structure,
cistern, yeah,
the cistern.
yes, the top part of it was open.
Oh, the top was open.
That's exactly right.
So it would catch the rain, but also it could catch bugs too, I guess.
Well,
You have a filter
we
on
had a
it?
filter in there. You went in, we did it, and we would make trips. We didn't go to the cistern every time we needed water.
Uh-huh.
We would carry buckets.
Oh, you take a
and
bucket to the
buckets and-
cistern,
and get the water. Take 2 buckets of water and take it back to the house.
take it back to the house.
Yes.
So water was very precious that time,
Yes,
I
it
imagine.
was. It was very
You,
precious.
you didn't let that water run.
No, we didn't let it waste. That not in the least. Not in the least. It was so very, very precious.
Did-
Almost as precious as gold.
Oh, that's right. Sometimes more so.
Yes, yeah.
And well, you said that, I heard that pigeon peas, someone said that there were pigeon peas that you would eat on the island?
Yes. Mac had a garden, which he grew his vegetables.
Right.
And of course, so one of the peculiarities of Bahamians, there are certain dishes that they favor, and one of the dishes is something called pigeon peas. Hispanics call it. We refer to as gandulas.
Gandulas, okay.
Pigeon pea trees, and he would have the pigeon pea tree would be in his garden as well.
Right.
And we would pick the peas, and they'd come in a shell, pick them, and then we would let them dry out and take them out of the shell and cook them. that
Unhusk
way.
them for that.
Right, exactly.
And then on the island, I heard there was a rumor. There was a zoo, but it's not the zoo that we think of as the old Crandon Park Zoo. It was another zoo.
Exactly. The zoo was one that had been there. I suspect it was built somewhere in the 20s, the teens, and it was built at a time when they thought they were going to develop the land, and it had been abandoned.
Okay.
And the only animals that were there at the time were the alligators.
Were alligators.
And the cages were vacant, and Mac would order his chicklets from Cicero Buck from up north, and he would rear his chickens and keep them caged in the
old alligator cages.
No, well, no, in the old part of it that where the cages where the other animals were. You could definitely not keep them in the alligator
That's
cage.
true, too.
Yeah, you'd be in difficulty. Yeah.
And you call it chicklets. I love
The
that.
chicken, yes.
And you get that from the Sears Roebuck catalog?
Yes, they would a large box. I suspect the box measured about 30 by 30 by 5 inches, and they'd come in and bring them in, and little yellow biddies we call them, and he brought the feed,
Right.
and he would feed them, and they'd grow, and that was what we would use them for the meal.
Is that something?
Yes, yeah.
And then they came as little chickens. They didn't
Right.
come as eggs. They came as little
That's
chickens already
exactly.
hatched.
They already hatched.
And did he breed any more chickens himself?
Well,
Did
they
he have?
inbred. They
Uh-huh.
began to proliferate. You know,
Right.
that kind of thing.
And to get around on the island, did you have a horse or were there
Well,
goats or?
Mac used the horse. There was a tractor, of course, that he would
Mm-hmm.
go out in the field with, and there was a truck that was kept in the barn
Right.
that he had. And in later years, after the bridge was built, of course, he had a car.
Okay. And now you were here mainly in the summer, I assume,
In
right?
the summertime, summer months, and sometimes during the year during spring break around Easter time.
Right.
But later as the years progressed and mother thought that was very important that I be at service, that I
Right.
couldn't take time off during that time because I could only do it at the time when it was not going to interfere with my being serving at the altar at the church.
Exactly. Was there a school on the island for the children at that time?
No, there were no children, and that's an interesting question because I guess I have no idea how the Matheson children were educated.
And they
But
lived on the island. The
and they lived on
Matheson
the island,
children lived on the
exactly.
island. Okay.
Unless they were just here during the summer months, I don't know. But there were no schools. We went back to the mainland for school for the
Mainland
children.
meaning Miami.
Miami, exactly.
Ah. And so you took care of the chickens, and then you had it was a little family farm. I imagine they had some, what, a
Well, that was
vegetable
just,
garden
it
or
was
something
a little
like that?
garden. I suspect, as I reflect, it wasn't a terribly large garden.
Mm-hmm.
Very, Mac would buy these seeds. Watermelon, for example, was one of
Right.
the things that he had in the garden, and he would have a row of watermelon, a
Right.
row of okra,
Uh-huh.
a row of maybe some beans or peas and that kind of thing, or squash,
Right.
things like that.
It was a family. And then there was no road on the island. I guess the main road. Well, what was the road on the island?
They
Just
were
dirt
really
roads?
footpaths
Footpaths.
and,
Okay.
and dirt roads. Well, not terribly, just wide enough to pass through and get to the beach or get to wherever it was necessary for you to go, to the barn or to the zoo. When we went out to the lighthouse to fish, Mac had to take us and bring us back.
Oh, because he
It
would
was
take you.
further,
on-
much
it's
further
fur-
away. And
But could you go by the beach? Could you walk along the beach
yes,
to get
yes,
the lighthouse?
beautiful, beautiful beach, beautiful beach. It was very quiet. It was not crowded. Just us being
Yeah,
there.
you were only there, the only
yeah,
ones.
yeah. And nobody bothered. That's what I said about this whole spirit of feeling free to do and go where you want, to do what you want to do and go where you want
Right.
to go.
Let me ask you this: was Stiltsville, was that out there at all?
I have no memory of Stiltsville at all. I think that was a later invention or thought by some people who wanted to build it. As I said, after the bridge was built, it was built
Right.
somewhere around, I'm told around 47. But I know definitely it was when I was in high school around 53 or
Right.
52.
Uh-huh.
We would ride over to Virginia Key, and that's about as far as we went. And I know that Stillsville was something that I think developed later. I believe it was
But
developed
you don't
later
have a
on.
memory of
No,
seeing it out
no,
there.
no, not whatsoever. Even though we would go travel between the mainland and the Key
On the boat.
on the boat, I don't remember any of that.
Do you remember what kind of a boat it was that took you over?
It was not a very fancy, classy boat. It was not a yacht. It was a kind of tugboat.
Right.
And we had little seats in the cabin. We would sit there. And it was just a short trip, I think no more than, not even 45 minutes to get between from here to Miami.
And then in Miami, you would dock. Do you remember where?
Near the 3rd Avenue Bridge.
Uh-huh.
And near what was then the lighthouse on the Florida Power and Light Company was right along there off the Miami River.
Oh, off the Miami. Okay, I know
Uh,
kind of where that is.
yes, yes.
And then once you got there, was there transportation or someone would pick you up where you could do what you needed to do?
We would either use the bus transportation,
All right.
or we would have relatives that we could call and tell them to come and pick us up. We're in
Okay.
town. Hey, but it was a schedule, and it was really a routine that they were accustomed to doing, and each of the families that lived on the island that served the island,
Right.
they had a home or place in Miami that they would stay until Monday morning.
Oh,
you
I see.
Well, Mac and Gussie would stay with my mom and myself on occasion. Sometimes they would stay with her relatives, Gussie's relatives. Gussie was my godmother, you see.
That's
So they
right,
were
that's
they were
right.
very close.
Very close. And then there was a schedule. The ferry came over every week. You told me like on Saturdays and Mondays the ferry would come. But there was no telephone on the island, right? There was no way to
There,
communicate? Or how
I
did that?
believe there was a communication method by telephone between Mr. Shelton and Mac on occasion. This line would ring, and I believe it was battery operated.
I see, like a wireless or
You're right,
something.
exactly.
And Mr. Shelton lived on the island
He lived
part
on the
of time.
island, and that's where the Matheson children lived with him.
With him,
Yeah,
and he
yeah,
took care of the
yeah.
Matheson
Right,
children,
exactly.
kind of oversee
That's exactly
that
right.
area. And, well, there weren't many children. Did you play with the Matheson children, or who did you hang
No,
out
we
with?
did not. Gussie was left alone a lot, and so it was one of those things where not only I would come, on occasion I would come by myself,
Right.
but Gussie had some nieces and nephews, and there were some other cousins that would come. She loved children, and she would entertain us, and she would you would think she was one of us in terms of being a child. Yeah, that kind. And I think that was good for her. And Mac delighted in that because he wanted to make her feel comfortable
Right.
and feel good because she had so much alone time.
She had a lot of,
Yeah, yeah,
and then he was here. Now, he was busy in the, taking care of the plantation.
exactly.
And then she would be with the kids. Did she play games with your kids, or?
Well, we did crossword puzzles that came out of the magazine and some of the papers. We had a lot of reading material. That was the one good thing about being over here. I learned how to enjoy myself, quiet time, and to use it for reflection and to use it for reading.
Absolutely.
I think that was a
When you
beautiful
go
thing
to the other side, where people say, "Where is Key Biscayne?" Being it was an island with no bridge,
But
and
we didn't refer to it as Key Biscayne. We referred to it as either Cape Matheson or the Cape.
oh, the Cape or Cape Matheson.
Right. yeah.
Matheson after the Matheson family.
That's exactly right.
And then Virginia Key, was that, that was also,
Virginia Key was a piece of land that's I suspect geographically it's probably north west of here, and it was the first beach designated for black minorities,
right,
and that came about somewhere in the early 40s to the mid 40s where it was developed for them, and then later Mitchell Wolfson developed the opposite side of Virginia Key for the Sea Aquarium,
oh, right.
which was very, very popular.
Yes, it is,
Yeah,
it is. Well, thank you so much, Reverend, for taking the time
Well,
to
I
be with
enjoy
us.
being it, and I enjoy this time for reflection and about one that I knew and loved, those that I knew and loved so well,
And it was
Mac and Gussie and the family.
Absolutely. And it was a time that most of us don't realize how people lived on the island.
Yes, yes.
And it was
very-
before all the development, before anything came
yeah,
on.
almost a kind of primitive living,
Yes, it
but a
was.
very idyllic living.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.